Continuous lighting, whether that be existing or added, is great because you can see exactly what the final image will be. But flash is versatile, powerful, and compact, so it remains the most dominant form of added lighting. We'll start this section with a discussion of devices and applications of outdoor flash.
The easiest method to use flash is on-camera flash. You just put it on your camera, turn it on automatic, and shoot. I was photographing this scene here with my back to the sunset with on-camera flash as an experiment in getting a paparazzi look. And suddenly this appeared. Colorful sunsets don't last long, so I only had enough time to fire off a few shots with the on-camera flash. So while I'm critical about lighting, I also don't want to miss the shot due to fiddling with lights.
I did this with on-camera flash because it was quick, and I had to act quickly to get those storm clouds. After I got that first shot, I took more time to set up an off-camera flash, and I got this. The lighting is better on her, but I like the clouds more on the previous image.
While there's no angled direction to on-camera flash, sometimes the impact of the lighting, composition, and the model alone are strong enough to make on-camera flash work. We walked a long way for this place, and the rapidly changing rising sunlight meant I couldn't be messing around too much with the light. So I just used on-camera flash. This was a compromise on quality that I had to make.
I'm sure you can see that I couldn't be messing around with external cumbersome lighting equipment for a situation like this. Besides, until I got there, I didn't know if I'd even need additional lighting. And for these last ones, I didn't. The shoe bracket that you get with speedlights, along with a small ball mount, allow you to aim the flash wherever you want it.
Another appropriate use of on-camera flash is when you're at a place where there's a lot of activity. With skiers and snowboarders zipping all around me, I can't possibly take a light stand. So unless you have an assistant who can be mobile with a softbox, you'll have to compromise on the light quality. On-camera flash is flat and boring, but at least it fills in the dark areas.
In the hands of someone who knows what to do with on-camera flash, it can be a very useful tool. This was late in the evening and I wanted a more interesting look than this flat light. With the flash set on auto zoom, which means it tracks to the focal length of the lens, it illuminated the entire image. Not much better than the previous one. In fact, I think it's worse. But manually zooming the flash head in and re-aiming it a bit gave me this. In this crowded compartment, I used a zoom setting on the flash to try to avoid light hitting her legs, but they were still somewhat bright because they were closer to the flash. But then I did this by turning the flash head and zooming more to only light her face.
This guy wanted to be photographed by his deer stand. I had already done a series of much better images elsewhere, and I thought this was going to be a dumb picture, so I didn't put much effort into doing it. I just put my flash on camera and snapped away. Well, wouldn't you know, he chose it for his yearbook photo. So I had to do a lot of fixing in Photoshop just to make it acceptable. Well, I guess I learned a lesson. Work hard on every shot, even if I don't think they'll want it, especially if they request the shot. I assumed that since this girl was facing up on an overcast day, there wouldn't be a problem with darkness in her eyes. But there was a problem. So, since I didn't want the side railings to be lit as they would have been with a broad light source like my softbox, I put a flash on the camera and set the zoom to cover just the center of the photo.
Ever so often there's a discussion about bare bulb or a modifier to simulate a bare bulb and its benefits. I'll touch on a few thoughts about that. This diagram illustrates the waste of doing any kind of bare bulb head or modifiers.
Small light sources are small light sources. There's no visual difference in the direct light that you get on a person whether you use a bare bulb device or not. So if you're outside, why waste all the energy on light rays that don't hit the subject? Of course, for the purpose of this example, I have the speedlight a few feet from the subject. With it that close, you'll see a slight difference in the angle and the shadow edge softness, but that doesn't happen in actual shooting conditions.
That Stoffen omnibounce wants something for its omnidirectional light to bounce off of. But what is it going to bounce off of?
Let's compare straight flash and a flash with a bare bulb type of modifier. This girl is lit with natural light coming from our right. The barn and the foreground grass are causing excessive contrast, so the flash is filling in those shadows, which is one way some photographers use bare bulb outside. As you can see, there's virtually no difference between the two. There was a slight difference in color since the Stoffen warmed the light a little bit, but I corrected that in the raw conversion so that we'd only see the illuminative differences, not the color. Looking closer at the image, the only real differences will be in the fact that a bare bulb disperses light in all directions, and that can cause a slight change in the shadow detail. Because the bare bulb's light is bouncing off of the nearby barn, we get a teensy bit of fill effect in the shadows, which is evident here. But as far as I'm concerned, it's safe to say that bare bulb and straight flash have no differences when used to light a subject directly.
Here's an example of a girl standing in an open area without anything lightly toned nearby, just the grass. I did this late in the day so the ambient light wouldn't affect the outcome, and to make it easier to see if there are any differences. Can you see any differences? Can you tell me which one was done with bare bulb and which one was done with just the shoe mount flash aimed at her? I can't. So whenever you hear a theory about lighting or a new lighting modifier, I would urge you to test it for yourself. Many theories or products are simply gimmicks that offer no big advantages over what you probably already have. The lighting contrast of an auxiliary light can vary depending on the surfaces that the flash's light can bounce off of. If there are light-toned surfaces between the flash and the subject, there will be a little lower lighting contrast with a flash that's farther from the subject. Without any nearby light-toned surfaces, the contrast won't differ. In this case, because there was dark green grass below her and nothing else light nearby, the contrast was essentially the same for both close and far flash placements.
When I'm shooting flash, I almost always have my flash units on a light stand.
On-camera flash can work sometimes, but really off-camera flash is the way to go for a main light. It sets a direction for the light, and we can position the light to slim a person with shadow. A through-the-lens metering or TTL flash cord is the least expensive way to get your flash off camera, yet still take advantage of full exposure automation.
I manually set the shutter speed at a short enough duration to make the sky look gloomy. But then there wasn't enough light on her face, so she needs auxiliary lighting. So I use the handheld flash to light her up. but as you can see, her face is lit well, but her hands are pretty dark. I went back to the raw file and made a lighter exposure for her hands. I could have fixed that by setting the zoom flash on a wider view, but even so, you still have to be very careful to aim the flash properly.
If you enjoy working closely to a subject with a wide-angle zoom lens, you might have fun with this setup. The dome covering the flash head makes it easier to handle the flash because there's no need to be precise in aiming it. I'm not using the dome for soft light or bounce light because it can't do either of those without a large surface to bounce off of. It's only used here to give us even illumination.
Here's an image done with this setup. Because the light can't extend beyond your arm's length, you won't get into too much trouble with light that comes from an angle that's too extreme.
I've had great success and consistently predictable results with my Canon system. There are many TTL flash systems out there, and some photographers have encountered more difficulty with theirs than I have with mine. But the basic concepts are the same, regardless of what camera or flash brand that you use. Currently, for off-camera eTTL flash, I'm using the Canon 600EX RT flash units. But whether you use Nikon or Sony cameras, or the Godox flash gear, or anything else, all of the principles I'll be discussing about flash still apply. With camera-mounted flash control systems, you can control all the important aspects of remote flash right from the transmitter.
If I want to vary the exposure compensation on one flash, I can. If I want to be fully manual on one, I can. If I want the flash to be off, I can.
Or you can control all aspects of each flash through the camera's menu. You might find this easier. Regardless of what camera system you use, it's best if your flash system has upward mobility, meaning you can purchase flashes more powerful than a speedlight. I usually prefer a flash amount that looks very subtle and almost natural. When the light is already soft and even, TTL flash only adds as much as is required to produce a nice addition of a direction of light. I'll crop into this to show the delicate balance of flash to ambient. Finding the right shutter speed is important because it can drastically affect the story. This look is not my cup of tea. Using flash, we can easily change the relative brightness of the background with the shutter speed. You can't do that with a continuous light on the subject from a reflector, a spotlight, or an LED light, because if you lengthen the shutter speed with those types of devices, both the background and the subject will get brighter. With auxiliary light, we have two controls. We choose the amount of light on the subject and the background exposure or brightness. Here I used no flash and photographed directly into the sunset. There's obviously no color in it, but your client may like it. Then, adding flash for a good exposure on her, we can opt for a moderate shutter speed for a light and airy look. Or we can shorten the shutter speed a little bit for a richer sunset color. A lot depends on the feeling that we want the image to have. A very short shutter speed causes a dark sky, but I don't think that works here with her white dress. It might work with a black dress. But because her outfit is light, I want the sky to be light. Here I added just a little bit of flash. And here I used no flash and let her go darker than normal for mood and a very natural look. I think all of these have merit. It just all depends on what you and the client want. I'm a devout follower of using automation. The technology is smarter and faster than we are. I shoot auto exposure and TTL flash. I always have. But if you still want to set your flash exposures manually, this is how to do it. First, read the ambient light, either with your camera's computerized exposure metering pattern or with a handheld meter. Then set your shutter speed for 2/3 of a step faster. Next, adjust the flash's output to 1/3 of a stop lower than the normal proper exposure. By the way, that's what my Canon camera does automatically as soon as I turn on the flash. Why do we need to do this? Well, if we don't, the flash exposure and the ambient exposure will add together to equal a one-stop overexposure. That's what happened here. This was in the 1980s when I was using a manual flash on top of the camera. I calculated the exposure by distance, but I didn't take into account the ambient light that was already there. So she was overexposed. Not by her tiny swimsuit, but by the flash. So a small underexposure of the flash and the ambient together get us the proper exposure.